Hello everyone. So today we're going to start with a South African contemporary play that is titled My Children, My Africa by Ethel Fugard. So for the table of content that we're going to go through in today's session, we're going to go through the playwright Ethel Fugard, a little bit of background history about him, plot summary of the play, the characters that are involved in the play, the history of South African Bantu education because that gives the play context, and then questions to consider and discussions just about the play. So the playwright Ethel Fugard. Ethel Fugard is a South African director, actor, and writer who's written more than 30 plays. He was born on June the 11th, 1932 in Middelburg, South Africa. So Fugard's mother, Mrs. Fugard's sense of injustice that was perpetuated in her society had a lasting impression on Fugard. The two major themes in Fugard's work that we've seen and are relevant in most of his plays are love and truth, and these have been fleshed out based on what he has experienced and seen in his life growing up in Port Elizabeth. So Fugard continues to write plays in South Africa that critique on segregation as well as um, gaining a lot of interest and popularity in America and Europe because of the color dynamics of Afrikaans and Black people during the apartheid era specifically. So Fugard was quoted saying that about my children, my Africa, that I think to a large extent it came from watching Lisa, which is his daughter, who played Isabel in the play. Dealing with the problems of growing up in South Africa, the question of white guilt, the whole dilemma of the country, the differences in color, and working with the dynamics of that were his main concerns. Ethel Fugard is also called the conscious of his country because he remained controversial and keeps asking questions about South Africa, about the dynamics of our country as well as throughout the world at large. So just a brief plot summary of the play. The play is divided into two acts. So in the first act, it opens up in a Bantu classroom in South Africa in 1984, where we have Mr. Anele Nyalata. He's also known as Mr. M, which is a teacher who is a teacher at Zolila High School. So he's just finished moderating the debate between Tammy and Isabel, and Isabel won this debate. But nonetheless, Tammy and Isabel, who is white and Tammy is black, end up building a very strong friendship based on that. So Mr. M then proposes that they have a inter-house English literature competition where they will debate with hopes that Tammy will win a scholarship from that, and Isabel agrees, and they go through practices in order to prepare for the competition. But Mr. M notices that Tammy might be involved in some trouble based on the protest that was happening at that time and plans in terms of um, the protest and the Soweto uprising that was going to take place. So he was very worried about Tammy's fate because of that. And then Tammy actually criticizes Mr. M for his old-fashioned ways, and he doesn't necessarily agree with Mr. M's struggle for freedom or the way he analyzes the struggle for freedom. And then in Act 2, we see now that Tammy then decides that he does not want to continue with the competition because he feels that it's not a good decision for him at that time, and he would like to rather go through with the boycotts that will be taking place at the school, and he wants to sort of fight um, the fight against Bantu education and him being oppressed or suppressed due to the educational system at that time. Mr. M tries to convince him that no, actually, violence is not the answer, that he should rather use his English literature and words to inspire other kids to actually do good instead of resorting to violence. But Tammy is very, very adamant about this and persistent, and he does not listen. And the boycotts go through, and Mr. M ends up being killed in the mob because of the boycotts and them finding out about him expressing who the people who were involved in the boycotts were. So just to go through the characters, it's a three it's three main characters in the whole entire play, and we see it mostly taking place in the classroom. So in Mr. M's classroom, so the first character is Mr. M, who is a black middle-aged teacher at Zolile High School, and he brings two students together that are from different backgrounds. We see him attempting to cross the boundaries of apartheid during this time. He is a longtime teacher and a believer of non-violence, and he thinks that rather to overcome Bantu education and the segregation in South Africa, it should be through education and not necessarily violence. He says that the difference between an animal and a man is that man thinks, and he thinks with words. And he also states to Tammy that without education, he will grow to be a stupid man. And then the next character is Tammy Bigwana, who is a gifted young black man who is a student of Mr. M. He's very gifted intellectually, so he's 18 years old, but he understands the boundaries that have been put on him because of apartheid. Having to go through a Bantu educational system is prohibiting him to him reaching his full potential, and he believes that violence and action will be way more impactful than words ever will. And he states that the struggle doesn't need um, the words that the English words that Mr. M has taught him how to spell. Rather, it's more about fighting and taking action. And so he aims to do so. As much as Mr. M has so much hopes and aspirations for Tammy and his future, Tammy seems to be more focused in fighting the movement and the revolution of South African education. And then Isabel Dyson, she's a gifted young white South African, also known as an Afrikaner, and she's more from a prestigious all-white girls' school. So she's in a position of privilege in this play. We see her friendship with Tammy and Mr. M. It sort of opens her world up to the complexities of race, so she becomes more aware of it and sort of her position as a white person in relation to and her advantage in relation to Tammy and his situation. So they begin to relate on a deeper level and start to become friends because of that relationship. So as I've mentioned, just to give the play context, in the South African um, history of Bantu education, um, the system did during the apartheid era is that it created educational inequalities where blacks would not be allowed to receive education, and that would be limited from educational opportunities and potential of being in the working class. So clearly these were some of the constraints that Tammy was aware of in his situation and how these would impact him negatively in his future. Educational inequality was also evident in the funding, so they didn't have opportunities for funding. Isabel mentions, "Oh, are you going to be able to study? What are you going to study?" And this is something that Tammy does not see as a possibility for him because of these constraints that have been put against him under the system. Hence, his strong urge to fight against them. So the Bantu education gives context in terms of the play and the inequality that or suppression and oppression that Tammy is faced under or based in because of the educational system at the time. And then just to close off, just some questions to consider. We know that knowledge is power, so we need to consider in what ways were Black South Africans restricted to their access to knowledge. So the fact that they weren't given an opportunity to have education, how were they restricted? And then, do you believe that Tammy or Israel or Isabel could have a brighter future? And if so, how? Is it based on just their work ethic, or is it based on other external factors about the educational system? And just some other possible areas of conflict between Isabel and Tammy. And then what is the role of education in this sense? Is it more oppressive, or is it more liberating for Tammy and Isabel as well? So what is more effective? When we look at the play, we need to consider the written or spoken word, or the physical violence. Which of the two would be more beneficial in this situation? And then these are the references.